Greetings, everybody. Happy Tuesday. Dr. Jeff Riggenbaugh back here with you on another Tips Tuesday, where I bring you a tip for dealing with the difficult people in your life. This free social media series is based upon the content of my new book, Disarming High Conflict Personalities. And I come to you each Tuesday and give you a small tip for dealing with the difficult people in your life. Today, I'm excited because we're moving into the actual 8 types of difficult people, and we're going to start by talking about the bully. If you have not gotten your tip sheet, sort of top 10 tips for dealing with the bully in your life, go ahead and click that link below and grab your tip sheet. But today's video is actually going to focus on the top 3 red flags, top 3 signs you might be dealing with the bully. And I think this red flag section in each of these 8 types of difficult people is so important because regardless of the type of difficult person, I can't tell you how many times working with clients, I've heard people say things like, oh, he just changed overnight. Oh, a CEO says, Jeff, you just never would have seen this coming in the interview. Once we got to looking into it, yeah, you would have. And no, he didn't just change overnight. Almost never does somebody just change overnight. Almost always. There are red flags if we know what we're looking for. So that's why I think this red flag section is so valuable, because the sooner that we can catch them and realize what we're dealing with, then the quicker we can sort of shift our focus and strategize to be able to interact with them more effectively. So today, 3 red flags you might be dealing with a bully. And number 1 has to do with name dropping. Bullies oftentimes name drop. And you may hear me give examples from different settings. And so we see this regardless of setting in life. But oftentimes in the corporate world, in the workplace, we see this as early as in job interviews. I mean, if you're in HR or you're on management team or you have some role in recruiting, the hiring process, be on the lookout for this. Because oftentimes they may drop the name, Joe C., who is CEO of such and such a corporation. And if Joe C. is a millionaire or has a lot of respect in the industry or whatever the case may be, he's obviously, he or she, bullies are oftentimes he's more often than she's. Some of the other types of difficult people, by the way, are more often female than male. In the actual coaching program, we get into gender discrepancies and what demographics they show up in most frequently. But that person, whether it's a he or a she, is obviously trying to get you to associate them with Joe C. and sort of borrow credibility of that other person. Now, the reality is they may never have met Joe C. in their life. They may know Joe C., and actually Joe C. may not think very highly of them. So the importance of doing reference checks and doing our research and checking around. But watch for that name dropping is sort of the equivalency in dating. And I think this is embarrassingly enough, a somewhat common strategy in a lot of guys. A client that I worked with, life coaching client that I worked with, he would describe his process to me. And he says that, yeah, he'll find this girl that he wants to approach. He says, I'll find somebody that's a 10 on his scale of 0 to 10, and I'll approach her and I'll just look at her. I'll just stare at her until she notices and she looks at me, and I'll say something like, oh, excuse me, I'm sorry, I couldn't help but look. You look strikingly similar to my ex-girlfriend. So sort of planting in their minds is the strategy. And believe it or not, sometimes this seems to work, although oftentimes it leads to clients or people. I speak from the reference of my clients, but people getting in relationships that aren't the most healthy. But the strategy is to, again, similar to the way that worked in the interview setting, is to sort of put themselves on a level that in reality they oftentimes aren't, to try to elevate their image in the mind of the other person. So be on the lookout. Even if small, even if subtle. Number 1, red flag number 1 that you might be dealing with the bully is name dropping. Number 2, and this sounds more simple than it is, but again, I think people are, some people are very astute. We're just busy. We live busy lives. We don't oftentimes pay attention very well. We just don't notice these things. So really hone in and notice, pay attention to. Number 2 is how they treat other people. How do they treat other people? Oftentimes when working with management teams, I'll have someone say, oh, well, I just saw how, the charisma that he had and the leadership ability and his, how he got things done. And yes, that might have happened, but what oftentimes the person doing the interviewer doesn't notice is, did he or she run over 6 other people in the process? And if they treated multiple people poorly in the process before, likely they're going to treat multiple people poorly as they work for you in their process moving forward. And again, in that moment, oftentimes leaders are just sort of captivated by the leadership ability or the charisma or the style or the take charge, ability to take initiative or these kinds of things. And in that moment, they're not thinking of the possible consequences. Gee, if this person runs over everyone they interact with, it's going to lead to poor morale. It may lead to a poor employee satisfaction surveys. It's going to increase our turnover. It's going to be I'm going to be less productive because I'm going to spend time dealing with all these kind of messy people problems that are created. In the moment, that stuff is oftentimes overlooked and it's not made the priority that it needs to be. So watch how they treat people in your personal life, whether it's a family member or, again, a dating relationship. I always would tell people, if he treats you like a queen, but he treats the waitress like a jerk, then he's a jerk. Okay, so it's easy to get enamored with a person's sort of charm and how they come across and how they treat us in the moment. But let's take a step outside ourselves and observe. Red flag number 2, how do they treat others? If they treat others poorly, that should raise a little bit of a red flag in our minds. Although we'll have these thoughts that want to sort of rationalize and, oh, but he's going to be a good leader, and oh, he's going to produce, and oh, but he's so good looking and has so much money, and all these other things that we like about the person. Let's not overlook how they treat other people in their life. Red flag number 3 simply has to do with, and again, this oftentimes sounds obvious for people, but how do they receive criticism? We think of bullies as verbally and sometimes even physically abusive and these kinds of more obvious behaviors. And oftentimes we do see those, but sometimes those don't show up in the early dating period, in the early stages of the interview process. They don't show up when the person very first walks through your door, when the kid very first sits down in your classroom. And so we have to be on the lookout for some of these less subtle red flags, and how they are able to receive criticism is going to really open a window for you, give you a window into what degree of narcissism, frankly, and sort of bully type of behaviors you can expect if you move forward with this person in whatever capacity in your business or in your life. So really pay attention to that. I've actually coached professionals in the interviewing process. Talked about this at one of the SHRM conferences I spoke at recently, but specifically asking a question. Tell me about a recent failure that you had and how you dealt with it. Tell me about a recent time that you made a decision that you regretted and how you dealt with it. So ask them specifically to talk about failure or a mistake or something along those lines. And you can even sort of poke the bear in the middle of that just a little bit. You don't want to run somebody off, but did you think at some point that there might have been some other, did you think about some alternative solutions? Did you think there may have been a better way to go about it? Just a little bit, and see how the person responds. Do they get really defensive immediately? Or is there the flexibility to sort of, have some discussion about it? A friend, a new dating relationship, go out of your way to criticize them. Even if you agree with them on 98% of the things that you talk about, find something that you don't and voice a disagreement, voice a criticism, see how they handle it, because that's going to give you a good window into what type of a person you're dealing with. It's going to give you a good window into their personality and to their character. So there are 3 tips you might be dealing with bullies, things that you can look out for early on in the process. If this video was helpful, if you want the rest of the red flags you might be dealing with a bully, as well as any of the other information and the other strategies for dealing with bullies and other difficult people you encounter in your life, again, click on the link below. Grab that top 10 tips for dealing with a bully, and go ahead and grab your copy of the book as well. Disarming High Conflict Personalities. I hope that tip was helpful for you. Hope everybody has a great week, and I look forward to seeing you next Tuesday. Bye for now.